What better time than the holiday season to do a how to build your own PC guide? This is going to be part one. So we're going to do all of the physical aspects of how to build your own AMD Vision Black gaming PC. So the first thing we're going to do is do a quick inventory of everything that I have here, all of the parts that you're going to need to build your machine. So the first step is we need a processor. So we've gone with the AMD Phenom 2 X6 Black Edition processor. This is the brand new 1100T, T for turbo. So it's clocked at 3.3 gigahertz when you're running threads on all 6 cores, and is clocked at up to 3.7 gigahertz when you're running threads on 3 cores or fewer. So that's pretty cool. The next thing we have is a cooler for it. So we've gone with the Corsair H7T liquid cooler. Next, you're going to need a motherboard. So the motherboard we've gone with is the Asus Crosshair 4 Formula, and the color scheme of this motherboard, as you're going to see as we put the build together, is going to match really well with the other stuff we have, including 4 gigs of Corsair Dominator GT memory. So I want you guys to come have a close look at this. So we've got a red and black color scheme, which is very appropriate for an AMD Radeon-based machine. The next thing we're going to need is video cards. And for video cards, we've gone with dual Radeon HD 6870s. So those are going to be running in Crossfire X. And last but not least, no, not even close to last actually. And finally, we're going to need storage. So we've gone with a couple of SandForce SSDs. These are both 40 gig SSDs, and we're going to be running them in RAID 0 for maximum performance. So that means we've got an 80 gig boot drive, and then we also have a DVD writer for optical storage. Next, we've got case and power supply. So we've gone with the Corsair 600T. It's got a ton of airflow options. When you are building a high-end gaming machine, you want to make sure you've got ample cooling so none of that stuff overheats, especially if you're going to be doing overclocking. And then finally, the AX850 power supply. This is a single rail 80 plus gold power supply, which means it's highly efficient no matter what kind of a load you put on it, and it will be able to easily handle the 6-core processor, RAM, hard drives, video cards, no matter what you throw at it. So that's why we've gone with that particular model. It's also fully modular, which as we get into the further parts of our guide is going to be very important for a tidy, cool build. Now let's talk about AMD Vision Black and what exactly that means. So AMD Vision Black means we've got the best of AMD. So we've got their Black Edition Turbo 6-core processor, which means we're going to be able to do video rendering, 3D rendering. We're going to be able to play the latest 3D games. Pretty much no matter what you throw at it, it's got horsepower to spare. It also means that we're pairing that up with AMD Radeon graphics. So we've got the 6870, which is going to provide Eyefinity support with up to 4 displays in Crossfire X, and actually even more displays on some of the other cards. And we also have ample performance for the latest DirectX 11 3D games. All of that is tied together on AMD's latest 890FX chipset, which is featured on the Crosshair 4 Formula. And all of those parts together are what makes it AMD Vision Black. So that is their highest tier of system, and we have all of the ingredients needed for it. So let's talk safety precautions really quickly here. Let's talk about grounding yourself. So you can either wear an anti-static wrist strap, or every time you're about to touch a sensitive component, make sure you ground yourself. That means you can either touch a very large metal object, or with your power supply plugged into the wall, plugged in but not switched on, you can touch the casing of the power supply, because that ground wire going into the wall is going to be sufficient to ground yourself from any static electricity. It's especially important during dry seasons like December right now when we're doing this guide. Also, make sure you're not working on a carpeted area and you're free from any extra clutter. Styrofoam is another great thing. You know what? Take stuff out of the packaging, get that styrofoam away from you. Now, if you're a regular viewer of the show, you've probably seen my tech station. Now, not everybody has $100 to drop on a tech station, so as part of my build guide, I'm going to be giving you guys some tips and tricks, best practices along the way. Here's how to make your own tech station when you're building your machine. Take your motherboard box. Do not put the anti-static wrapper on top of it. Put your motherboard on top of it at the edge so you can hang any cards over the side, and boom, there's your tech station. Motherboard box, perfect mobile tech station. So I always highly recommend, before you build in the case, you actually hook everything up and make sure the system at least posts before you even get started. So the two things we're going to do on the board, though, because we know all this hardware works already, is we're going to install the CPU as well as the RAM before we get any further into the process. So CPU installation is fairly straightforward. All we do is take our AM3 processor, lift up the arm, Insert with no force. It is a ZIF, zero insertion force socket. We line up our golden arrow here with the white arrow at the side of the socket, and we close the arm. That's how simple the CPU installation is. For RAM, we follow a similar procedure. So we find DIMMs A1 and B1. Those are our first channel of RAM. We insert, watching for the notched key on the bottom of the RAM DIMM. Because this is a Republic of Gamers motherboard, we've actually got just one clip to do up. So we put it in the one side, put down the other clip until it snaps in place, and that is our entire procedure for installing RAM. You want to put them in the color-coded slots so that they are both in the same color for dual channel operation. Now, before we put the motherboard away, I just want to show you guys another best practices thing. Out of the motherboard box, I have taken the manual, the driver disk, the crossfire bridge that we're going to need. I've taken out an appropriate number of SATA cables, and I've taken out the I/O shield. Those are all the things I'm going to need for this build. And I'm also going to show you guys the installation procedure for the Dominator airflow, which is going to be giving us, well, extra airflow over our Dominator GT modules. So we're just going to stretch that over the clips for the RAM. So the reason you install this after you install the RAM is that now you can't take the RAM out once that's done. So there we go. We have it in place. And then we'll show you the fan hookup later when we do that section. The next thing we're going to be doing is power supply installation. So that's the first thing that I generally put in the case, because no matter what else you're installing, it probably needs to hook up to the power supply at some point. So you can see this case has a bottom mounted power supply, and because there are raised grooves here in the bottom of the case, as well as a dust filtration system under a mesh airflow grill here, we can comfortably install our power supply with the fan grill at the bottom. So that's how we're going to be installing it. We've got obviously our switch and plug at the back. So all we do is slide that into place right there. Make sure that it lines up with the holes at the back of the case, which right now it isn't. So I'll fix that in just a moment here. There we are. Slide that right in, and there it is installed. So I'm going to turn that around so you guys can have a look at it. And I also want to show you guys all of the stuff that the case and power supply come with to make our lives a little bit easier. The case comes with all of the screws that you need to install all the hardware it can hold. And this is true of any case on the market. So if you get a motherboard and it doesn't come with screws, or a hard drive and it doesn't come with screws, don't worry, your case has it. It also comes, and the power supply comes with these too, with some black cable ties, which you can use to cable manage your system. And they also come with, okay, power supply screws. We've got a lock for the case, as well as a power cord, and then all of the modular cables that we are going to need to hook everything up to our power supply. So before we're actually done with that, we're going to go ahead and screw in the back of the power supply. So we're going to use the 4 black screws that were included with the power supply itself, and just start those with our fingers, and then finish them off with the screwdriver. For our next step, we'll be installing the motherboard inside the case, because really that's where a lot of the other stuff needs to hook up to as well, so we got to get it in there. First thing is we're going to install the I/O shield. Now the I/O shield is a little bit tricky. Go ahead and zoom in so you can see this. But I want you to see all these little dimples around the outside edge of it. Can you see those? Awesome. So when you're installing that into the back of the case, so I'm just going to give you guys a bit of a better angle here. You go ahead and line it up in the right spot. Don't apply any pressure yet. Can you see that? And then one corner at a time. Go ahead, and you're going to see a bit of flex in the case, but you got to push it in so that the dimples go past the outside of the opening on the case, all the way around, just like that. Your I/O shield is now installed. There's no screws involved. It just sticks in there like that with those little dimples on the outside edge. Next step you're going to want to do is lay down the case. Now I'm not going to lay down the case for the sake of showing this to you guys, but you're going to lay down the case and position the motherboard inside the case. So the way that I always do it is I start a little bit further away from the I/O shield, and then I actually have the board angled. Can you see the angle that I'm holding the motherboard at? So I have the board angled until I line up all of the ports at the back. Can you see that those are lined up there? And then I double check through the back of the board. Are those lined up? Yes, they are. And then I can go ahead and lower the board down onto the motherboard standoffs. Now this case has the motherboard standoffs pre-installed. Double check your case to make sure that it also has that feature, or you may need to install motherboard standoffs by screwing them in. Once you've got it positioned in the right place, double check, make sure there are no cables caught in between your ports and the I/O shield, because that can happen. And then go ahead and start screwing it in. So we're going to use the motherboard screws included with the case, and we're going to put in 8 in this particular case, although in most it will be 9. So I'm going to take a quick moment, because it was kind of hard to see when it's in the case, to show you guys the bolt pattern layout for ATX. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 holes on a regular ATX motherboard, and they're going to be lined up this way, and then these 2 will actually be lined up, and then the third row has 1 here and then kind of 2 over to the other side. So that's how you can find them on your motherboard. Last step for motherboard is, of course, the power cables. So we've gone ahead and connected the 24-pin as well as the 8-pin power cables to our power supply. And we're taking off the little tab that covers the extra 4 pins on the motherboard. Yes, we do need those extra 4 pins, but no, we don't have to if we have a really old power supply that only has a 4-pin connector. So we can leave that on and just plug in 4 pins. So we go ahead and connect that, make sure they're in there securely, and then we connect the 24-pin power as well. And if I could see it, that would make my life a lot easier. There we go. Just plug that in just like that. For the next step, we're going to be installing the CPU cooler. So what we're going to have to do is take off the stock retention bracket. Now, a lot of AMD coolers will use that stock bracket, but the H7T does not. It actually uses a back plate, its own separate back plate. So I'm going to take this off camera. That is step 1. Now, for full instructions on installing the H7T, please refer to the user manual included with it. I can't go over all of that today, but it is quite simple if you follow all the steps. First thing we're going to do is use this handy feature of the 600T case, which is the motherboard cutout. So we're going to go ahead and install our backplate. If we didn't have a case like this, we'd have to install our backplate before we put the motherboard in the case to save ourselves, well, taking the motherboard back off the case, installing the backplate, and then reinstalling it. So the backplate is in position, and the next thing we're going to do is we are going to gently attach the hold down plate, which I have already installed the screws in, so that we are going to be able to put the CPU water block in position. So that means I'm just going to tighten like a couple revolutions, all 4 of the screws, to get that in position. Now, the H7T mounting mechanism, it's a little bit touchy, so give it some time, all right? And don't get too frustrated. So there you can see they're all in position now, but it's quite a lot of give to it. So the next thing we need to do is, now here, this is going to be a bit of a lesson in and of itself. Airflow planning, okay? So this case has a huge exhaust fan up here at the top. So you can actually position the fans on the H7T a couple of different ways. You can actually have them drawing air out of the case as exhaust, or drawing air into the case as an intake. Now, because we have a big fat exhaust here in the top of the case, and we're going to get better CPU temps by taking cool air from outside and bringing it in through the radiator, I have opted to use it as an intake. So that means this fan is blowing this way, and then the one that I use to attach it to the back of the case is going to be pulling air in here. Now, I have also positioned it with the barbs at the top. Although you can position it any way you want, I've gone with the barbs at the top because, well, no particular reason. That's why I've decided to do it. So here you can see on the CPU block / pump unit itself, right here, there are actually little ridges. So you see those little grooves in there? Can you see those? You can see them? Good. That is where these little legs right here on the retention bracket need to sit. So it is a little bit tricky to get it on the first time, and I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how this works. I really hope you can see this. So you slide them into the gaps, then twist it, then your phone goes off in the middle of a Tech Tips episode. It's all good though. All right, so you get those in there, and then give it a twist so that they get under. And then once they're in the right position, it is attached. Now there's no need to install anything other than the thermal compound that is included on the H7T. It is a very high quality thermal compound, so you do not need to change it. There, now you can see what it's supposed to look like when they're all in the right place. Once it's positioned correctly, you can go ahead and tighten all 4 screws. Don't crank one all the way tight right off the bat and then do the others. You want to tighten them all partially in a cross pattern the way I'm doing right now, until they're all starting to get pretty tight, and then finally you can complete the installation process by tightening them right up. And then I'll show you guys the radiator mounting in a minute. For the next step, I'm positioning this fan in the back. Now please note, I always am paying attention to things like where the power leads are coming off my fans for optimal cooling. Remember, this is not properly cable managed. We're doing a separate episode on cable management, so please search for that once it is up on my channel. So I'm going to go ahead and put the fan in position. Then I'm going to put one of the bolts through the fan. Actually, I can put all the bolts through the fan. And then once those bolts are sticking through, see how they come all the way through the fan? Those are going to screw into the other side of my radiator. So I'm just going to do a few of these so that they're all in the right position. There we go. And then we can take the radiator, put it up against the fan, making sure that the radiator mounting holes line up with the screws. And then if we put in at least 2 of the screws, then we know it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm just going to tighten that up. Same thing, cross pattern. So just tighten it a little bit at first. Make sure everything's in the right position, which right now it probably isn't. Make sure it grabs, don't force it. All right, there we go. We have our screws installed, so I'm just going to show you guys also what I'm doing from the back here. All right, turn that around. So you guys can see I'm just holding the radiator up against it, tightening those screws a little bit into the rubber grommets. Don't overdo it, otherwise you might strip the threads on the rad. And there we go. The H7T is installed in the 600T case as an intake, cooling off that 6-core turbo CPU. Next, we're going to do the positioning and installation of our drives. So we have our 2 SSD drives as well as our DVD drive. Now with hard drives, you have some considerations like cooling when you're deciding where to put them. So if I had 3 hard drives, for example, I would probably put them here, here, and here to give the most space in between them for fan airflow to cool them off. With SSDs, it doesn't really matter. So my only real consideration is cabling and airflow. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take these and I'm going to put them down at the bottom of the cage so that I get more fan airflow over to my graphics card, which is up higher, and I have very nice short cable runs to the back of the SSD drives. Now, all of these drive sleds are fully SSD ready. The only little modification you have to make is you got to take out this little metal piece right here, which is quite easy from the rubber grommet. And then you grab the SSD and optical drive screws from the included screws, position the holes in the right places, and then go ahead and find your screwdriver, which I have now located, and put the 4 screws into the bottom, just like this. Once you've installed all 4 screws, you slide the hard drive rail back in, and that's it. You've installed your drive. So now we're going to do the wiring for the drives. Here's power. All right, if you've ever hooked up a SATA drive before, then this will be quite routine for you. Power for both drives, and then we're also going to do data cables for both drives. We have already plugged the modular cable into the power supply on the other end, but these 2 we're going to plug into the motherboard. And the optical drive works exactly the same way, so we're not going to cover that separately. Now the first step when we're installing the optical drive is to release the tabs here for the front grill, the front drive bay covers. So we can turn this around now so you guys can actually see what I'm doing again here. So then what I want to do is hold my hand here, pop it out from the inside. Okay, and then we have removed it. So now installing an optical drive in the 600T is a piece of cake. I can even do it watching myself through the monitor. Haha, see? Look at that. All right. It has a toolless mechanism that is basically as simple as popping this out. Actually, not yet. I think you just whack it. Yeah, you just put it in like that. There you go. And then if you want to remove the drive, then you push this in and slide the drive back out. So it actually locks itself into the right place, just like that. Now, if you want it to be more secure, you're going to ship the system or anything like that, then you might want to go ahead and put a screw in the other side of the drive. So here. And then right there. It will be 100% secure, no matter how many, toddlers are pushing on the front of it. It's not going to go anywhere. Last but not least, for the optical drive as well as the SSD drives, we're going to show you the cabling that goes along with those two things. And here we are plugging the other end of those cables with their locking connectors into the SATA 3 gigabit per second ports on the motherboard. The next thing we're going to do is connect our front panel connectors. So the one we're going to start with is USB 3. Now USB 3 doesn't have a standardized internal connector, so the only way to hook it up is to just run a cable from the inside of your case. And in the 600T, Corsair has included a little bracket that has a gap in it that you can run the cable through. So you just go ahead, throw that through the back of the case, which I have now done. Put the PCI bracket back in. Reinstall the thumb screw, just like that. And then pull it through and plug that into a USB 3 port, being careful to select a USB 3 port, color-coded blue, on the back of the case. Can you see the blue color? Hopefully you can see the blue color there. There you are, that's the USB 3. Next step, and this is where sometimes you will have to consult the manual, although I believe with their Republic of Gamers boards, they're usually pretty clearly labeled. So next we have front panel audio, so we're going to hook up the HD audio, come in for a close-up here. And you can see there is one pin that is actually blocked out on there. Can you see that? Blocked out pin. And there's one pin missing from the front panel audio header. So you just plug that in correspondingly, and there you are. Then we have FireWire. So we got to find the FireWire header on this particular motherboard, also labeled 1397, so that one is right here. And then we'll go ahead and find the blocked out pin, and then plug that in with the corresponding missing pin in the connector. All right, with the 600T it's quite simple, but with a lot of cases it can be slightly more complicated. Then we have two USB headers, same thing. Blocked out pin goes into the USB connector where there is one blocked out. So let's go ahead and throw that in here. And I sure hope that's USB. You know what? Yeah, there we go. That guy, and then that guy. So we have two of those plugged into the USB headers. And last but not least, we have our front panel switches. You will pretty much need to check your motherboard manual for this one, although on this board it is labeled for me. So reset and power switches. Actually, the orientation is not important, so I'm plugging in the reset switch right here on this particular case where it's labeled for me, and then I'm plugging in the power switch here, right next to it. Not sure if you can see that or not. Can you see that? Awesome. Okay, but for the LEDs, the hard drive LED as well as the power LED, the orientation, that is the positive and negative, is important. So the colored wire, if there's a black one or a white one, the colored one is always positive. So I go ahead and plug that into IDE LED. And on pretty much every ASUS board since, well, I've been working on computers, the positive terminals on the board are to the left. So I've gone and put the colored cable to the left. And then here we have power LED plus and power LED minus. So you can see they're actually labeled. So even though the colors don't correspond, they are labeled for me. And then that's going to be the one that's right above it. So I'm going to plug the, hopefully I can get this out of your way so I can show you guys. So I'm going to plug that into the IDE or hard drive LED spots right there on the motherboard. So now I have hooked up the front case switches and all of the front panel connectors. Finally, we're going to do the graphics cards. Now, positioning the graphics cards is a little bit tricky, and I want you guys to try and remember that not all PCIe 16X, that is PCI Express 16 times slots, are created equal. So even though you see 4 PCIe 16X slots in this particular motherboard, those are the red ones if you look inside, not all of them actually run at full 16x bandwidth. Now, for optimal performance with graphics cards, you want to install them in slots that run at least PCIe 8x electrically. So these are physical 16x slots, but not all of them run at 16x electrically. I cannot stress that enough, you guys. Okay, so you want to consult the manual and find out which combination of PCIe slots is going to give you the most effective bandwidth to your cards. So in this case, on the Crosshair 4 formula, I have selected to use this slot here at the top. Okay, and then as my secondary, I have selected this one. So these will run at 16x, 16x with 2 cards installed. So I'm removing the thumb screws, removing the PCI brackets. Okay, these are dual slot cards, so I have to remove 2 slots for each individual graphics card. And then I'm going to go ahead and install my bottom card first for no particular reason. Honestly, no particular reason for that. Oh, and I went and pulled out the wrong slots. Okay, so we'll be back in a sec. So ensuring that we have the correct PCI backplates removed, we're going to go ahead and position the graphics card over the slot so that everything is even. Make sure you don't take the bottom of the card, so these prongs right here, and jam those into your motherboard. That can be bad, very, very bad. So you want to make sure that those are going into past the motherboard into the housing for them that is built into the case. So we position it in place, push the whole graphics card down until it stops. You can see that the PCI Express lock at the back is now engaged, whereas with the empty slots, they are unlocked. So that one is now locked. So we can make sure the card is in its correct position. And then we're going to go ahead and let's do the second card first. So we're going to install our second card as well, positioning it directly over the slot. Push down firmly on the entire card, and there you have it. Next, we're going to put in our screws. So I'm going to do 1 each for these guys, just for the sake of keeping things a little bit shorter. I know this is a very long episode, and I do appreciate you guys sticking with us for it, because it is not an easy task doing a condensed build guide. All right, so there we go. We have the cards secured now. And then last but not least, we are going to do power for these cards. Now remember, the cabling inside this case is atrocious right now. So you're going to want to watch our cabling guide for how to make sure that everything is optimal in terms of airflow, because you can see all of this stuff is in the way of good airflow reaching these graphics cards right now. And that is definitely not ideal for their operation, because the intake on this case is at the front. So there's just a whole mess here. Anyway, in terms of the physical connections, that is all that we need. And in addition to that, we will also install a crossfire bridge, which I left on the floor. And here it is. Crossfire bridge goes directly over the crossfire fingers on the card. One there, one there. And now they are ready to be configured via software in Crossfire X. All right, last thing that we need to connect before we can consider our build done is all of our fans, pumps, cooling basically. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that fan lead that comes out of our CPU pump unit here. So that's a water block pump combo unit. And we're going to plug that in to the header on the motherboard that is labeled CPU fan. Now there's no electrical reason that you need to plug it into CPU fan. But what it does do is it allows the BIOS to correctly report which fan that is and what the RPM of your pump is. And it'll also set off an alarm if your CPU pump fails, something you may actually care about. All right, then we're going to take our H7T. We've wired the 2 fans together with the included Y cable. And then we're going to run that around to the back of the case. Okay, so that one, we're going to take our Dominator airflow fan, run that around to the back of the case, making sure that the cable's not going to bump this fan up here when it's spinning. Okay, then we're going to turn around the case and plug all of the fans into the integrated fan controller on the 600T. So the 600T has support for 1, 2, 3, 4 fans, which is perfect because that's exactly how many we have. So we're going to plug in our top fan, like that, in no particular order here. We're going to plug in our Dominator airflow fan. We're going to plug in our radiator fans. We're going to plug in our front fan. And then last but not least, I've hooked up another modular cable to my power supply for 4-pin Molex, and we're going to plug that into the fan controller because that is what is actually going to power all of those fans. Now we can manually control them using this knob at the top of the case, whether we want maximum airflow or minimal noise, depending on what our preference is. Now remember, you can also plug fans directly into 4-pin Molex power on your power supply if you want them to spin at full speed all the time. And some motherboards, if you plug these headers directly into the motherboard, actually support fan speed control through the motherboard BIOS itself. So our build is now done, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to stop the video here. I am going to go shoot a separate video, which is a cable management guide, and then we'll come back and do our conclusion as well as show you a couple little quality control tips.